You've been very patient, and thank you for putting, we've been here for a long time here, so we appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. This has been, I think, a productive hearing, a useful hearing. Mr. Jeffries, I want to start with this. Listen, I think everyone here is concerned about enhancing safety standards to minimize the risk of derailments. And I think there is bipartisan interest in moving rail safety legislation. I think we're going to be successful in doing that. At the same time, we want to enhance safety. We want to protect the interest of consumers. And I will say there are portions of the Brown bill as currently drafted that concern me, in particular giving significantly more authority to the Department of Transportation. This Department of Transportation, their policies created a supply chain crisis in the last 2 years that drove up costs and increased scarcity for consumers all across the country. And the Biden administration has also demonstrated a deep animus to energy. And I would certainly be concerned about giving Secretary Buttigieg the authority to make it significantly more difficult to transport energy in the United States and to drive up cost for consumers. In your judgment, Mr. Jeffries, what are the provisions in the current draft of the bill that concern you, and in particular, what could be the negative consequences for consumers of Secretary Buttigieg having too much authority to drive up costs?
Well, thank you for that, and I very much appreciate the question. Contrary to statements that have been made, the AAR has not taken a position on this bill. Frankly, I think there's a feasible path forward on almost every provision in there. Now, your definition of feasible and mine may not be the same, but I think there's an opportunity to work together to try to get to yes. I think the provision you're asking about is one that would apply, I think, upwards of 12 new rulemakings around any train that's moving at least one car of hazmat. Over 40% of trains move with at least one car of hazmat. Now, that could be a flammable gas. It could also be asphalt. And in my view, I'm not sure applying those same levels of restrictions for flammable gases and asphalt makes a lot of sense because of the overarching impacts it can have on the network overall, the impacts it can have on energy shippers, the impacts it can have on ag shippers, the impacts it can have on intermodal premium shippers, similar to UPS. Now, does that mean that nothing should be done? Absolutely not. I think there's a logical case to be made for a parallel requirement for trains carrying flammable gases as we currently have for flammable liquids. But it's about taking a risk-based approach that doesn't treat the entire class of commodities the same, but really focuses on what is truly a higher risk train versus one that's that perceives little risk. So there's a path forward there, and I think we just need to target what we're actually focused on here.
Well, thank you. That is helpful, and we will certainly commit to working with you to try to find a solution that enhances safety while at the same time protecting the interest of consumers. Mr. Shaw, you and I talked yesterday, and you described that Norfolk Southern was a proponent of venting and burning the vinyl chloride from all 5 tanks. At least one of the tanks was significantly injured. There has been disagreement as to whether the other 4 tanks were compromised or not. Will you commit to providing this committee with any and all information you have as to the condition of all 5 of those tank cars?
Yes, we will be transparent with the committee about our understanding of the conditions on the ground. My goal during the entire process was to provide unified command and the incident commander with the best information that we had. And at that point, there was concern that these 4 cars had been in a pool fire and that the pressure relief valve had failed, and there was concern about the pressure in the cars.
In terms of the decision to vent and burn the vinyl chloride, which is what caused the massive plume of smoke and the rather extraordinary sight of an American city essentially on fire, among the decision makers that were engaged in that process, did anyone disagree with the recommendation to vent and burn the vinyl chloride from all 5 tank cars?
Sir, my understanding is Unified Command was aligned around that decision, and that decision was based solely on the safety of that community.
Ms. Homendy, what are the alternatives to venting and burning, and what are the risks involved in the venting and burning procedure?
Part of FRA guidance on venting and burning is to look at the alternatives. One is a controlled venting through the valves. In this case, they were melted, so that was not an option. You could do hot tapping, which is essentially cutting a hole in the tank car and draining the liquid, essentially transloading it into another rail car. There are risks to that, and then there's the vent and burn.
Mr. Shaw, Ms. Homendy testified earlier today that the locomotive that was involved in this derailment was immediately or almost immediately put into service on another train, and so the video was not available for examination. Did that happen, and why? I have to admit, hearing that, both Senator Cantwell and I looked at each other and thought that was a really bizarre thing to hear. So is that true, and if so, why?
Senator, my understanding is that 15 minutes of video are available, time before, during, and immediately after the derailment. My understanding is we followed protocols.
Mr. Shaw, I asked you to answer the question I asked. Is it true the locomotive was very shortly thereafter put into service, and the result was significant portions of the video were missing?
Senator, at some point after, and it sounds like it was shortly after it was put in service, I don't have the details. I'm happy to follow up.
All right, well, let me just say, anytime there is a locomotive involved in a serious derailment, it is lunacy that video is not preserved and that locomotive is put into alternative service. So that, I feel confident we could get unanimity on this committee on that. Let me ask also, there's a lot of discussion about Command Central having the Wayside detectors and the conductor and the engineer not having information. This particular tank car, has Norfolk Southern examined whether it had triggered previous Wayside detectors either on this train or in other circumstances?
So I believe that's part of the NTSB investigation.
Has Norfolk Southern examined that? Do you know if it had triggered previous Wayside detectors?
I am not aware that it did.
Ms. Homendy, do you have any information on this, or do we have some confidence that we will be able to get the answer to that at some point?
I'll provide you that answer. What we do have is that it had not reached the critical threshold that is set by Norfolk Southern until that third one.
Yeah, I'm certainly interested not just in the critical threshold, but the trending analysis and the shift that is less than the critical threshold, but could well indicate a problem before the derailment.
We're also interested in that as well.
Okay, final question. Mr. Shaw, I'm sure you heard Ms. Allison's testimony, which was powerful. She raised a very simple question about moms that are concerned about their kids. She described her 7-year-old who was afraid for his own health and safety. What is your answer to her and to other moms who are afraid for their health and safety in this community, and who, as she described, may not be able to move, may not be able to sell their house because their home prices have dropped? What is your answer tonight? What should she tell her child, her 7-year-old child, tonight? And what should other moms in that circumstance tell their kids tonight?
Senator, I'm terribly sorry for the impact that this has had on the community, and I know that it's been traumatic. I was there during the vent and burn, and I saw this plume, and I know what it looked like. There's ongoing testing by the EPA, the Ohio EPA, and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. They all show that the air is safe and the water is safe to breathe. There's millions of data points. There is still enormous concern within the community about 3 long-term issues. One is long-term health care. one is about property valuations, as you noted, and one is ongoing water monitoring. And so Norfolk Southern is working with relevant stakeholders, which include state and local authorities, on setting up funds to cover all three of those.
How many families were impacted?
Senator, there are 4,700 approximately folks in East Palestine, and then there's some who are impacted in Western Pennsylvania as well.
So you had said earlier in your testimony that you've spent to date, if I got the number right, $24 million. You also noted 6,000 families altogether. Doing quick math, that's about $4,000 per family. Do you agree with Ms. Allison's testimony that home prices have dropped significantly, and if there's a mom scared for her kids, that she right now doesn't have any great options?
Yeah, Senator, I understand your point. Our contributions to date are just the start, and what we're offering through the Family Assistance Center is that folks want to relocate, we will pay for the relocation fees. Our Family Assistance Center has been open since the day after the derailment.
So I want to understand you correctly. You're saying if a family in East Palestine wants to move, that Norfolk Southern will pay the cost of their moving, and will you also make them whole if they try to sell their house and they can get substantially less for it than they could have before this derailment?
Senator, what I'm saying is that they want to leave their house for a while. We will pay for those relocation fees, and we are working with relevant stakeholders in a long-term fund for the property value assurance.
So you'll put them up in a motel or hotel temporarily, but you're not assisting with moving? I just want to understand what you're doing right now.
Right now, we are putting them up in a hotel and paying for food and clothing if needed. And we're also working with relevant stakeholders on a long-term fund for property valuation.
Well, let me say this, Mr. Shaw. You've said multiple times you want to make it right. Let me encourage you, make it right is a real commitment. And this committee expects Norfolk Southern to do exactly that. These people and these families matter.
Well, thank you, Senator Cruz. That concludes